Hi YouTube, Darth here. Sometimes it's easy to just do the same thing over and over again. I refer, of course, to DICE's decision to use the skill balancing system in Battlefield 1. It's a leftover from Battlefield 4 and has at least one part that is even older. The balancer relies on two flawed components that I'll talk about today. Those two components are the skill rating system and the built-in balancer. Both are the same as they were in Battlefield 4, and both are even more terrible for reasons I'll get into. But first, what is skill? I'm not talking about some intangible concept, but an actual stat that DICE tracks. Chances are that you are unaware of this stat if you're not a Battlefield veteran, or if you haven't visited your Battlefield career page on battlefield.com. I'll leave some instructions in the description below on how you can check your own skill score. Seemingly, the purpose of skill is to provide a number that rates your overall performance as a player. At a technical level, skill score includes three main other stats: your score per minute, your kills per minute, and your kill-to-death ratio. If you're a player that does relatively well at all of these, you're considered a more skilled player. At face value, that can seem pretty reasonable. Let's go deeper. But first, a catch. Battlefield 1 is still somewhat of a black box, but based on a couple of rounds, I feel fairly confident the math used in skill calculation is the same as Battlefield 4 and other Battlefield titles. To arrive at a value, skill doesn't just add SPM, KPM, and KD together, but instead runs them through a mathematical formula to arrive at its result. At the end of a round, the game grabs your key statistics from the round. Those numbers are then run through the skill formula. First, all these values are divided by what I consider to be magical numbers. Your score per minute is divided by 1000, your kills per minute by 3, and your kill-to-death ratio by 5. The second step is that all these values are then again multiplied by a percentage. Keep in mind, these values are already modified by the magic numbers. Score per minute counts for 60% of your skill value, so it is multiplied by 0.6. Kills per minute counts for 30%, so it is multiplied by 0.3. Finally, your KD is only 10% of your skill and gets multiplied by 0.1. All those numbers added together equal your tabulated skill for a round. But there's one last step. Your new skill score is calculated. It consists of 90% of your previous score and 10% of your last round's score. This is your skill. If Battlefield were nothing but deathmatch, this would probably be an okay measure. 40% of your skill comes directly from kills, and that's mostly how fast you get kills, not how efficiently. So if you repeatedly run to a room full of enemies, throw dynamite and explode, you're pretty skilled by that measure. If you think that's an absurd way to measure actual skill, you'd be right. But there are other components. The majority of the skill calculation, 60%, comes from score per minute. SPM can vary wildly depending on what type of game you're playing and even what map you're playing. Score per minute by itself is probably a better measure of skill for objective-focused gameplay like Conquest. But Battlefield doesn't keep track of skill for each game mode separately, and they're all calculated using the same mathematical formula. Have a great couple of games of TDM? You're probably now a top-notch skilled player according to the game's calculations. What if you, the top-notch TDM player, then join Conquest, but you're terrible at Conquest? Well, you'll have to play a number of rounds before that takes its toll on your skill score. Want to try your hand at sniping for a few rounds? Or perhaps you just want to run pro medic and simply revive people without kills? Well, misfire any component of the tabulation, now the game thinks you are a terrible player. Even if you have a great round, your skill score can still go down if you don't equal as many magic points as the previous rounds. The other downside about skill is that it can be abused. You can purposely and quite easily drive your skill stat down, and it's easy enough to boost it upwards too. Fundamentally, it is a near meaningless statistic fumbling to try to quantify how good a player is. It's so bad, even DICE took a shot at trying to replace it in the waning days of the Battlefield 4 CTE. Skill has been in multiple Battlefield titles. It's not changed at all. It's nearly worthless, but it's never been important until now. Why is it important now? Because the game's built-in balancer uses it to make teams even and supposedly balanced. Every server uses this balancing system. Servers are populated using the skill matching system. You can't get away from it even if you use the server browser, as other joining players will continue to be filtered this way. The entire foundation of the balance of the teams in Battlefield 1 is built on a broken, bolted-on leftover skill system from previous Battlefield games. Why does your team suck? Because skill was used to balance your teams. If you're a good player playing alone, you'll probably be tossed onto the bad team. or at least what the game thinks is a bad team. If their skill rating isn't perfect, and it just might be, you're going to suddenly find yourself steamrolling. Play a bunch of good games in a row, even if your team loses, and you'll suddenly be facing even tougher opponents. That's right, do good on a losing team and the game will make it even harder for you. Compounding matters, squads don't get shuffled, so if you have a squad of highly skilled players that decide to band together, they're going to continue to steamroll, no matter how much the balancer tries to make the game even. Don't get me wrong, the game shouldn't break up parties or groups of friends. But let's at least acknowledge when you're on the receiving end of that pain train, you're probably not going to stick around for round 2 or 3. A shuffle of non-partied players might just be required. In summary of my rant, skill is a meaningless stat, the balancer uses it to balance teams, and it fumbles anemically to try to rebalance between games. So how could DICE go about changing this? First, skill as a system needs a serious overhaul. At the very least, individual game modes need separate tracking. TDM skill for TDM, Conquest for Conquest, Pigeon skill, and so on. Particularly if it's going to be used to balance the game. Beyond that, more than kills and SPM should factor into skill. DICE even started doing some of this work on the Battlefield 4 CTE, incorporating supporting factors like reviving, healing, and distributing ammo. For whatever reason, they parted from that work and went with old and busted for Battlefield 1. Even more specific factors could and should be considered in skill per game modes. For objective-based game modes like Conquest, I definitely think that wins versus losses and raw score per minute should factor more. Battlefield could probably get even more granular and track your skill with individual classes. But considering that it can't know what you're going to play ahead of time and isn't going to rebalance you based on your choices during a match, I think that might be a bit far-reaching for the purpose of balancing the game, but certainly interesting enough for players who want to rank themselves against other players. For example, who really is the best sniper in the world? If you try to pit their existing skills against each other, you'd end up with some kind of worthless ranking. Run them through the balancer, and you might even end up with them on the same team. That's how pointless it all is. So that's pretty much my thoughts on skill and its use as a balancing mechanic in Battlefield 1. It's not good, and it pretty much is a coin flip as to whether or not your game is actually going to be balanced. But what do you think of skill? What do you think could be a better measure? Be sure to mention your thoughts in the comments below. If you have a detail I missed, which is entirely possible given the somewhat hidden nature of this system, please also mention that below. If you're new around here, please take a moment to check out my channel and consider subscribing. And don't forget to force choke that like button before you go. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, YouTube.